The first thing you notice about her voice is not its strength, but its calm. A calm that has been learned the hard way. A calm that comes from decades of storms survived in silence. When she finally speaks, it feels less like a speech and more like a confession the world was never meant to hear. And when she chooses to speak now, after years of watching from the edge of the noise, she does not speak about fame. She does not speak about billions. She does not even speak about her son at first. She speaks about you. She says she has watched people like you for most of her life. The ones who work quietly. Who hope quietly. Who break quietly. The ones who feel something rising in their chest but never quite find the words for it. She says she recognizes the look. It's the same look she once saw in the mirror when everything she owned could fit into a few boxes and the future looked like a locked door instead of an open road. She tells you that the world will never clap for your early suffering. It will never trend. It will never be shared. You will bleed in private while others celebrate in public. And if you are not careful, you will begin to believe that your silence means your life is small. But silence, she says, is where the strongest foundations are built. She reminds you that she was not born into comfort. That survival, for her, came before dreams. That when she left a life that was breaking her, she did not know where the ground would be beneath her feet. Only that staying where she was meant disappearing entirely. And sometimes, she says, courage does not feel like power. Sometimes it feels like trembling hands and a shaking voice saying, "I can't stay here anymore." She says that when her children were young, she learned what it meant to be invisible. That she learned how many doors close when you are no longer protected by status or certainty. That people smile at success but look through struggle as if it is contagious. And in those years, she learned something she never forgot, that your value will always be questioned by those who do not know what it cost you to survive. She tells you that there were days she wondered whether she had made a terrible mistake. Days when she calculated every dollar. Nights when she stayed awake listening to breathing instead of dreams. Mornings when she had to choose between believing in the impossible or surrendering to the practical. And she chose the impossible, not because it was easy, but because the practical felt like a slow death. Then her voice shifts. Not into pride. Into truth. She says raising a child who would change the world did not feel like destiny while she was living it. It felt like chaos. It felt like unanswered questions. It felt like betting everything on a future that kept refusing to explain itself. She did not see rockets. She saw curiosity that would not rest. She did not see genius. She saw obsession. She did not see legacy. She saw a boy who could not turn his mind off. She says this because she wants you to understand something simple and terrifying: great things do not arrive with labels. They look like problems at first. They look like delays. They look like disappointments. They look like loneliness. And most people do not fail at greatness because they are weak. They fail because they grow tired of misunderstanding their own path. She says she is breaking her silence now because she is watching a generation burn itself out trying to be seen, trying to be chosen, trying to be validated by strangers who don't know their real names. And she says she recognizes the exhaustion in you. The kind that sleep doesn't fix. The kind that comes from carrying a life you feel called to but haven't caught up to yet. She tells you that no one warned her how lonely the middle would be. The space between not enough and too much. The years where effort is massive and feedback is silent. The seasons when growth feels like loss because you are shedding every version of yourself that once kept you safe. She says this is where most people turn back. Not because they can't go on, but because they don't want to go on without applause. Her message for you becomes sharper here. She says, stop asking how long it will take. Time is not your enemy. Fear is. Comparison is. The voice that whispers that you started too late is. The voice that tells you that you missed your moment is lying to you with confidence. She says the strangest thing about destiny is that it rarely arrives as a feeling. It arrives as responsibility. As pressure. As weight. As the slow realization that you can no longer live small without betraying something inside you. And when that realization comes, people often call it a crisis. But she calls it an awakening. She tells you that she has watched people abandon their gifts out of exhaustion, not because they lacked talent, but because they lacked permission. And she gives you that permission now. To choose differently. To walk away from roles that are shrinking you. To stop negotiating with your own potential as if it is a dangerous idea. She says you don't need clarity to begin. Clarity follows movement. Not the other way around. That if she had waited to feel ready, she would still be waiting. That readiness is not a green light. It is a muscle built under pressure. Then she speaks about failure. Not as an event, but as a companion. She says failure followed her into every new city, every new job, every new beginning. That it introduced itself early and often. That sometimes it was loud. Sometimes it was quiet. And sometimes it disguised itself as other people's opinions. But she learned to keep moving with failure beside her instead of behind her like a shadow she was trying to outrun. She tells you something few people say out loud, that success does not erase insecurity. It exposes it. It amplifies it. That the higher you climb, the more your inner doubts echo. That confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the agreement to walk with fear without letting it drive. Her words slow now, as if she knows this part will hurt. She says that people who change the world often grow up believing something is wrong with them. Too restless. Too intense. Too distracted. Too different. And for a long time, the world agrees with them. Until one day, the world decides those very traits are genius. She wants you to understand how cruel timing can feel when you are still invisible to the outcome. How unfair it feels to be misunderstood in the very season you are becoming. How tempting it is to shape-shift into something easier to accept. And she asks you, gently, not to do that. Not to trade the thing that makes you unbearable to some for the thing that could make you unforgettable. She says she knows you are tired. That your tiredness is layered. Physical, emotional, spiritual, creative. That some mornings you wake up already behind. That some nights you go to sleep disappointed in a version of yourself you can't quite reach. And she says she wishes she could tell you that this feeling goes away forever. But it doesn't. It only changes shape. What does change, she says, is your relationship with it. At first, exhaustion feels like proof that you are failing. Later, it becomes proof that you are building something real. Something that demands something from you. She tells you not to wait for certainty to choose courage. Certainty is a luxury for people who play small games. The kind of life that changes you will always feel unstable at first. If it doesn't, you're probably repeating something familiar instead of creating something new. She tells you that resilience is not loud. It is repetitive. It looks like getting up again without ceremony. It looks like continuing without witnesses. It looks like believing in a future you cannot properly imagine yet. Then she says your name. Not literally. But you feel it. The way truth feels personal even in a crowd. And she tells you that if your life feels delayed, it does not mean it is denied. Some stories need longer introductions because the chapters ahead are heavy. She says that she used to believe protection meant eliminating risk. Now she believes protection means teaching someone how to stand in risk without disappearing. And that is what she offers you now. Not safety. Strength. She warns you that the world will try to use your past to define your ceiling. That people will archive your mistakes as if they are permanent truths. That some doors will close not because you lack the key, but because your presence threatens the comfort behind them. She tells you not to beg at those doors. Build your own. She tells you that the hunger in you is not greed. It is recognition. Recognition that you are capable of more than survival. Recognition that you did not come this far to become acceptable. You came to become dangerous to limitations. She tells you that the most painful part of growth is outgrowing people who cannot follow you without losing their sense of you. That some will resent your evolution because it confronts their stagnation. That some will misinterpret your distance as betrayal. That some will only love the version of you that made them comfortable. She gives you permission to keep going anyway. She reminds you that you are allowed to become unfamiliar to people who only knew your earlier chapters. You are not required to remain understandable to those who stopped reading. Her voice softens again. She tells you that being chosen by the world is not the same as choosing yourself. That fame, attention, and approval are poor substitutes for self-trust. That if you achieve everything you ever wanted without believing in your own worth, it will still feel empty. She tells you that wealth is not just money. It is time. It is freedom of thought. It is the ability to create without panic. It is the luxury of saying no without fear. And even if your bank account is still learning this language, your mind can start speaking it now. She tells you to stop confusing slowness with failure. Not everything that grows matters quickly. Some roots take seasons before they shake the ground. She tells you that you are not late. You are loaded. Loaded with experience. With perspective. With wounds that taught you precision. With losses that taught you value. With patience that came from disappointment rather than comfort. She tells you that the future you want is not waiting for a perfect version of you. It is waiting for a willing one. She says that you will be tempted to quit quietly, to disappear without explanation, to retreat into something easier. And she says if that moment comes, she hopes you remember this, that discomfort is not divine disapproval. Sometimes it is confirmation that your life is no longer pretending. She says she spent years watching brilliance look like dysfunction before it looked like destiny. That she learned to trust motion over reputation. That she stopped asking whether something looked impressive and started asking whether it was alive. She tells you to stop trying to prove that you are worthy of the dream. The dream was given because you are. She tells you that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate the compound effect of staying. Staying when it's boring. Staying when it's quiet. Staying when no one is counting but you. Then her message becomes quiet enough that you lean in. She tells you that she is proud of you. Not for what you have achieved. For what you have endured without becoming bitter. For what you have lost without losing your voice. For what you still want without apology. She tells you that if you feel unseen, it is not because you are insignificant. It is because you are in the invisible stage of something that will one day feel obvious to everyone else. The silence she leaves behind is not empty. It's heavy with meaning. Heavy in the way a room feels after a truth has been spoken that cannot be taken back. And in that quiet, you begin to notice something uneasy inside yourself, not fear, not comfort, but recognition. As if her words weren't placed in front of you, but uncovered inside you. You realize she never promised ease. She never promised reward. She never promised that the world would notice you at the right time. What she offered instead was endurance with meaning. And that is harder to accept than hope wrapped in fantasy. Her voice returns, softer now, as if she is speaking from a memory rather than a stage. She tells you that there were years when she felt she was walking backward through life, moving, but with no clear sense of direction. When forward felt uncertain and backward felt shameful. When each step felt like an argument with her own doubt. And yet, she kept stepping. Not because she felt brave. Because stopping felt worse. She says that persistence is often misunderstood as confidence. But real persistence is not loud. It hesitates. It questions. It breaks down. And then it stands up again with red eyes and unfinished healing. It stands not because it is certain, but because it is stubborn about becoming. She tells you that the hardest season is not when you have nothing. It's when you have just enough to survive but not enough to grow. When comfort becomes a cage you decorate with excuses. When your dreams start to feel unrealistic simply because they demand a version of you that no longer fits inside the familiar. She says this is the moment when people start bargaining with themselves. Later, they say. When things calm down. When I feel more ready. When it makes more sense. And she tells you the truth quietly, later is not a time. It is a habit. And it steals entire lives without drama. She reminds you that fear does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers in reasonable tones. It sounds like logic. Like maturity. Like realism. It tells you not to risk because you might lose. It tells you not to reach because you might fall. And it never tells you what you will lose by not trying. She tells you she has watched brilliant people nod themselves into small lives with very good reasons. Reasons that looked responsible but felt hollow. And years later, they still wondered what might have happened if they had been irresponsible with one thing, their potential. She tells you that risk is not reckless when it is aligned. That not all danger is destruction. Some danger is activation. Her message begins to feel less like advice and more like permission you never knew you were waiting for. She tells you that you don't have to become someone else to become more. That you don't have to erase your softness to become strong. That you don't have to trade your sensitivity for survival. The world will try to harden you into something efficient but hollow. She tells you not to let it. She says the people who truly change the fabric of things often feel things deeper than others. Pain, joy, injustice, possibility. And for a long time, this depth feels like a liability. Until one day it becomes your leverage. She tells you that loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of alignment. Being surrounded by voices that do not speak your language will still leave you silent inside. She tells you that solitude, when chosen, can be power. When forced, it can be a teacher. And when misunderstood, it can be both. She warns you about the trap of becoming impressive at the cost of becoming honest. Of building a life that looks successful but feels foreign. Of collecting applause while losing intimacy with your own truth. She tells you that everyone applauds performance. Very few honor becoming. She tells you that the version of you who survives this season will not look like the version who entered it. And that is not betrayal. That is evolution. That is what happens when you refuse to fossilize in your own fear. Then she says something that lands like a weight but also like a key: you do not owe your old life an explanation. Growth is not a courtroom. You do not have to defend your forward motion to the ghosts of who you were. She tells you that some people will remember you only for who you were when they felt larger than you. And your growth will feel like an insult to them. Let it. She tells you that not everyone who walks with you is meant to arrive with you. And not everyone who doubts you is against you. Some people simply cannot see beyond the horizon of their own limitations. That is not your burden to fix. She tells you that envy wears many masks. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it sounds like humor. Sometimes it even sounds like advice. But you will feel the difference in your spirit when you listen. One voice will expand you. The other will make you smaller. She tells you to trust what expands you, even when it scares you. She speaks now about time again. About how unfairly it treats those who are becoming. How it drags in the middle and flies at the end. How the slow years feel endless and the abundant years feel brief. And how the mind, looking backward, compresses suffering as if it were small, even when it once felt unbearable. She tells you this so you don't misread this season as permanent. She reminds you that you are allowed to take up space before you are perfect. That you are allowed to speak before you are polished. That you are allowed to begin before you are believed. She tells you that waiting to be chosen is a strategy that only works for those who already believe they are worthy. For everyone else, it becomes a prison built from doubt. She tells you to choose yourself in small ways first. In mornings when you would rather hide. In decisions that feel inconsequential but quietly reshape your direction. In boundaries that feel selfish until they feel sacred. She tells you that discipline is not punishment. It is devotion to a future self you have not yet met but already love. She tells you that your consistency will outlast your motivation. That inspiration is a spark, but systems are the fire. And no one changes the world on sparks alone. She tells you that you will want proof that this effort matters. Proof that you are not just suffering artistically. Proof that the sacrifice is not foolish. And she tells you gently that the proof often arrives after the patience is tested, not before. Her voice grows steadier. Stronger. She tells you that the world is built by people who kept creating while being ignored. Who kept learning while being underestimated. Who kept refining while being dismissed. She tells you that obscurity is not a sentence. It is a workshop. She tells you that small beginnings are not a warning sign. They are the signature of everything that actually lasts. She tells you that when the attention finally comes, if it comes, it will not feel like salvation. It will feel like responsibility. Like weight. Like exposure. And if your inner life is not ready, what you once prayed for will feel like pressure. She tells you this so you build inwardly as fiercely as you build outwardly. She reminds you that the loudest validation you will ever receive is the quiet kind, the kind that comes when you go to sleep knowing you did not betray yourself that day. She tells you that inner alignment is a currency the world cannot inflate or crash. She tells you that your story is not behind schedule. It is behind the scenes. She tells you that the ache you feel is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that something unfinished is calling you forward. Her message shifts again, as if she senses your hesitation, the place in you that still doubts whether any of this applies to you specifically. She addresses it without naming it. She tells you that every meaningful life begins with the same lie, that you are the exception to every rule of becoming. That others are allowed to rise, but you are meant to remain adjacent to your own potential. She tells you that this lie feels personal, convincing, intimate. But it is a lie all the same. She tells you that the path does not open for the most deserving. It opens for the most persistent. She tells you that talent will open doors, but character decides which rooms you are allowed to stay in. She tells you that humility will protect you from arrogance, but ambition will protect you from stagnation. And you need both, constantly negotiating inside you. She tells you that it is okay to want more without hating what you have. That gratitude and hunger can coexist without canceling each other out. She tells you that wanting more is not ungrateful. It is an instinct of growth. She tells you that the world will try to categorize you quickly. To brand you early. To assign you a size that makes it easy to digest you. And she tells you to resist that reduction fiercely. You are not a label. You are a trajectory. She tells you that being misunderstood is not always a failure of communication. Sometimes it is a forecast of movement. She tells you that when your life begins to change meaningfully, some people will feel as though it is happening to them instead of through you. That is why their reactions may feel personal, even hostile. She tells you not to absorb what was never meant for you. She tells you that you will sometimes doubt yourself most right before a breakthrough, because the old identity senses its expiration. She tells you that transformation feels like loss before it feels like arrival. Her voice slows again, as though she is thinking of the long nights, the silent cars, the moments when even belief felt heavy. And she tells you that faith is not optimism. It is staying when optimism has left the room. She tells you that if you are still showing up with fear in your chest and questions in your hands, you are not failing. You are working. She tells you that the most dangerous day is not the day you collapse. It is the day you convince yourself you were never meant to stand. She tells you not to romanticize the destination so much that you despise the journey that makes it possible. She tells you that impatience will try to rush you into outcomes you are not yet built to sustain. She tells you that the delay you resent now may be the reinforcement that saves you later. She tells you that the world will offer you shortcuts that look like success. And some of them will even work for a while. But they will hollow you out if you stay too long. She tells you that integrity is not a moral accessory. It is a structural requirement. She tells you that you cannot outgrow the parts of yourself you refuse to be honest about. Then, with unexpected gentleness, she tells you that rest is not retreat. That you do not have to prove your worth through constant strain. That the body, too, needs to remember what safety feels like sometimes. She tells you that burning out is not the same as burning bright. She tells you that you are allowed to pause without quitting. To breathe without betraying the vision. To step back without stepping away. She tells you that exhaustion often disguises itself as disinterest. And you should not confuse the two. And then she says something that feels like it was waiting for you specifically: you do not need to become extraordinary to matter. You already matter. Becoming is not about worth. It is about expression. She tells you that your life does not need to look legendary to be meaningful. It only needs to be lived in alignment with your truth. The silence this time feels different. Not like an ending, but like the moment just before something irreversible begins. The kind of quiet that follows a door closing and a new hallway opening. You don't hear her voice immediately. You feel it first, as pressure in the chest, as weight in the spine, as a subtle demand to stand straighter inside yourself. And when she speaks again, it is slower. Measured. As if she knows these will be the words that stay. She tells you that legacy is not a monument. It is a direction. That most people think legacy is what remains after you die, but the truer meaning is what grows while you are still alive. The courage you normalize. The standards you protect. The limits you refuse to accept as permanent. She tells you that your future impact will not begin with applause. It will begin with ridicule, indifference, silence, or misunderstanding. That every meaningful shift in the world first looks like a mistake to those who profit from the old order. She tells you that when your life starts to shift, people will not argue with your idea, they will argue with your right to have it. They will question your background, your past, your consistency, your credentials. They will search your history for reasons you should stay where you are. She tells you not to hand them the weapon of your own doubt. She tells you that power does not arrive as control. It arrives as clarity. As the moment you realize you no longer need permission to move in the direction that has been calling you for years. She tells you that becoming dangerous to limitation does not mean becoming cruel. It means becoming uncooperative with every narrative that requires your smallness to remain intact. She tells you that most of the resistance you will face will not be loud. It will be polite. It will be wrapped in smiles and caution and well-meaning advice. It will tell you to be patient when what it really means is be still. It will tell you to be practical when what it really means is be obedient to the past. She tells you that if you wait for universal approval, you will die with unused potential arranged neatly inside you. She tells you that the courage you admire in others is not something they were born with. It is something they practiced until it stopped feeling foreign. She tells you that the world does not change when people suddenly become brave. It changes when people become tired of betraying themselves. She tells you that you will be called unrealistic right before your vision becomes inevitable. She tells you that every generation needs a few people willing to look foolish in the beginning so others can look wise in the end. She tells you that you are not too much. You are too awake for systems that require sleepwalkers. She tells you that the reason some people are uncomfortable around you is not because you are wrong, but because you refuse to pretend. She tells you that you must be careful with bitterness. That it grows fastest in people who secretly expected life to be easier than it is. She tells you to be fierce, not bitter. To be strong, not hardened. To be awake, not angry. She tells you that grief is not weakness. It is evidence that you loved something enough to hurt when it changed. And she tells you that life will change you more than once. She tells you that the fear of starting over is often greater than the pain of staying stuck. But only one of those pains compounds. She tells you that people rarely regret what they tried and failed at. They regret what they never allowed themselves to try at all. She tells you that the world will not announce when it is done training you. You will know when your tolerance for misalignment disappears. She tells you that one day you will wake up and realize that fear no longer has the same authority it once did. That it still speaks, but you no longer mistake it for truth. She tells you that when this happens, some doors will open. Others will slam. Some relationships will deepen. Others will evaporate. And all of it will be part of the same movement. She tells you not to chase belonging at the cost of becoming. She tells you that the price of growth is not paid in money alone. It is paid in comfort, in certainty, in outdated identities, in relationships that cannot stretch with you. She tells you that your nervous system will protest when you expand. That growth feels unsafe before it feels like home. That this is not a sign to stop. It is a sign to breathe and keep going. She tells you that the life you want will require a version of you that does not yet exist. And that version of you is being built through every moment you choose courage over convenience. She tells you that you will not feel like a hero while you are doing heroic things. You will feel uncertain, tired, and underprepared. That is what it feels like to be ahead of your current identity. She tells you that you will not recognize your own strength until you have no choice but to use it. She tells you that no one escapes the cost of becoming. Some people pay it through effort. Others pay it through regret. Both are expensive. But only one builds something. She tells you that you cannot outrun your calling by shrinking. It will only grow louder in silence. She tells you that the thing you feel pulled toward is not random. Desire is information. Restlessness is data. Dissatisfaction is a signal, not a failure. She tells you that your discomfort is not a flaw in the story. It is the engine of it. She tells you that you do not need to see 10 years ahead. You only need to honor what is trying to be born in you now. She tells you that the most powerful decision you will ever make may never trend, never be celebrated, and never be understood by the people you wanted most to understand it. She tells you to make it anyway. She tells you that when you finally step fully into your direction, you will grieve who you could have been if you had stayed small. And that grief will be strange, because it will feel like mourning someone who never existed. She tells you that the hardest goodbye is not to others. It is to the versions of yourself that kept you safe at the cost of keeping you stalled. She tells you that courage rewrites your memory of the past. That once you move forward honestly, old failures lose their power to shame you. She tells you that your future self is not judging you for what you don't yet have. That future self is watching to see whether you try. She tells you that you will not recognize your own impact while it is happening. That influence rarely feels like importance from the inside. She tells you that the seeds you plant in private may become shelter for people you will never meet. She tells you that significance rarely announces itself. It accumulates quietly through consistency. She tells you that the world will tempt you to simplify your life in ways that erase your depth. She tells you not to confuse peace with numbness. She tells you that being fully alive will sometimes feel intolerable. That the highs will be too high and the lows too low. And she tells you this is the cost of refusing to live half asleep. She tells you that your doubts do not disqualify you. They humanize you. They keep you listening. They keep you refining. She tells you that arrogance is certainty without curiosity. And you do not need that. She tells you that your task is not to become fearless. It is to become faithful to what calls you beyond fear. She tells you that destiny is not dramatic. It is obedient. It shows up daily, unglorified, asking for discipline when enthusiasm fades. She tells you that your life will not change when you finally feel different. It will change when you finally act different. She tells you that words do not move mountains. Decisions do. She tells you that the future will not reward your intentions. It will respond to your patterns. She tells you that if you wait for the perfect moment, it will pass you while you are still preparing. She tells you that imperfect action taken with integrity reshapes reality faster than perfect plans protected by hesitation. She tells you that the version of you who chooses comfort over calling will always have a logical explanation. And the version of you who chooses calling over comfort will always have scars. She tells you that she hopes you choose the scars. Then her voice softens for the last time. She tells you that your life does not need to look impressive to be divine. She tells you that you are allowed to want a life that makes sense to your soul even if it confuses the world. She tells you that you do not need to become someone else's miracle to become your own. She tells you that your value was never negotiated by your circumstances. She tells you that the part of you that still hopes, despite disappointment, delay, and doubt, is the truest evidence that you are meant for more than survival. She tells you that your existence is already improbable enough to justify your courage. She tells you that you do not need to be chosen by fate if you are willing to choose yourself. And then, with no drama, no announcement, no final blessing carved in stone, her message ends the way real turning points always do, with you still standing. With the road still open. With fear still talking. With courage still available.